Hey YouTube, Do-It-Yourself Junkie 369 here today, and in this video I'm going to be doing an initial look at this top Archery recurve bow that I picked up. I got the 56 inch, and basically if you've seen videos by New Sensei or Lily, Survival Lily, this bow is the same bow as the Mandarin Duck. What it is there's a company out in China making these, and then they send out and get branded by a whole bunch of different sources. And a lot of bows out there are done this way, like the Black Hunter. So there's a Mandarin Duck Black Hunter. I can't remember if I saw the Black Hunter on Top Archery, but I know I saw it under several different brands. And that, by the way, in case you're wondering what that bow is, Kramer, that was one of his favorite bows for under $200. So it'll come just in a box when you get it off Amazon. I picked it up for about 82 bucks, which is right in line with what everybody else said it was going to be. Usually they say $86. I went with the 35-pound limbs because I plan on using this for bow fishing, so I don't really need a lot of power for it. And I also want to introduce my wife into archery using this bow instead of a compound. And 35 is the minimum weight I need for hunting in the state I live in. Now, I do plan on hunting in the future in other states, and so I have a set of 50-pound limbs that are coming in as well. And that was one of my requirements when looking for the bow. I wanted something that was a takedown recurve because I already have a compound bow, and I wanted something that was really easy to source another set of limbs for, and I wanted something that was a good value for the money. And so Kramer's review on this wasn't very flattering. He hated it. It was, out of the 8 bows he looked at, is the one that he hated the most. Survival Lily, the one from Mandarin Duck, she kind of liked it other than it being too loud. And then New Sensei was really impressed with how well the bow shot, and he kind of felt like a bow snob and it had given an unfair judgment to cheap bows. And so he was seemed like he was fairly impressed, or at least that's the impression I got from watching this video. So we're going to take an initial look at it, go into how to set the bow up, and then also I'll do a follow-up video on some ideas I have for making the bow quieter. And after I shoot it for a while, try it out for bow fishing, get some use, we'll do a follow-on review talking about likes and dislikes on the bow. One of Kramer's biggest complaints was the bow comes with this string. He had put it on his bow and it seemed like the serving was in the wrong spot, and then also it didn't have enough serving that the part of the string brushing his arm guard was wearing prematurely. And so that's one thing I expected to be disappointed on, and I'm really leaning towards picking up one of his Flemish twist strings. And this has reinforced tips on the limbs, and I could get one of his fast flight strings and it'll support that, and not only will it shoot better, it'll probably increase the speed because there's less stretch in that string. This just comes with a normal Dacron string, and so it's like 20 bucks to upgrade this, and now you have a $100 bow instead of an $80 bow. Other than that, this package does come with the bow stringer. That wasn't very clear on the Top Archery website. There's an instruction manual that covers how to string it and put it together. Some of the reviews I've read said this isn't very clear, so I'm going to take some time to read through it and see like where the problems lie, and then we'll go in depth on how to set your bow up correctly. And then there is a fairly cheap but nicely lined bag to hold the bow, and the riser is in there. And one thing with the riser is this has hollow cavities behind the limbs here, metal, and so that's just going to act like a guitar sound box and really amplify sound. So that's one area where you need to silence it down. Another area that New Sensei was a little bit disappointed in was how thin the grip is. I have fairly large hands, but I also mainly shoot compound, and this feels about right for me. but I'm not used to the normal target Olympic style bow that he's probably shooting, and I'm doing more of a hunting application. So the length of bow, the shorter is usually a little less forgiving and not as nice shooting as a longer Olympic bow would be, but you don't want that long bow out in the woods getting snaked up on trees and brush. And then the grip, I feel like this is normal for me, even though he said it was a bit on the small side. And the reason I went with this rather than a bow like the Samick Sage with the wooden riser, I did not like how chunky it looked. It looked oversized. My previous recurve was a single piece Bear Archery. I don't remember the exact model. And that's what I shot when I was younger. I actually started out on traditional archery and then moved to compound bows. And so I want to get back into the traditional archery, but not spend $400 to $600 like a Bear recurve would take. And the other side of that is that bow wasn't a takedown bow, so it was really hard to transport. So I had a requirement of a takedown bow for two reasons. One, I wanted to be able to easily transport it, and two, like I said earlier, I want to be able to stick different weights of limbs on there for when my wife's shooting versus when I'm maybe going hunting out of state and I need the heavier limbs. And a second set of limbs is going to set you back about $60. The last requirement for bow fishing, I wanted bushings and areas to attach the roller for the fishing arrow and the reel. So getting a bow like the Black Hunter where there's no bushings at all just wasn't an option. Okay, I finished reading the instructions. The words are pretty good as far as being accurate. The pictures are a little bit confusing. Here it's talking about hold the riser a certain way and attach the limbs, bottom and top, according to how you're holding the riser, but the limbs are already attached. And then down here where it has you inserting the arrow rest onto the riser, it doesn't show anything with the nut that comes with it. And then also the orientation is not correct, which would lead some people to installing this incorrectly. When you pick up this bow, there's some stuff that's not going to come with it that you will need if you intend to shoot it. Obviously, arrows. These are the ones from my compound. I figured they'll work. They're for a 70-pound bow, but with this being an aluminum riser, I expect that I'll have basically a center shot bow and I won't have much archer's paradox to deal with. You'll also want some sort of finger tabs or glove, especially as you shoot a lot. The string will hurt your fingertips, and then especially if you have higher draw weights, I've noticed that these help with that. Probably want an arm guard. When I'm shooting my compound, I notice most of the time I'm not dealing with slings, with string slapping my forearm, but I am holding clothing out of the way. Because a lot of times when I'm shooting, it's in winter time for hunting and I'm wearing heavier clothing. But just in case, especially new archers, when I started I noticed I got hit quite a bit on the forearm with the string, and it's not a pleasant feeling. So you'll probably want an arm guard. And both of these are pretty cheap and you can almost pick them up in any sporting goods store, except for last time I was in Dick's. I've noticed the one that I would go to has pulled everything weapon related. So no bows, not even for bow fishing, no guns, no ammunition, and no accessories like this. So they pretty much become useless, and I don't recommend going there unless you're solely into tennis, golf, running, or biking. And their camping stuff is subpar at best. And then lastly, you'll need a knock point, and you'll need to know how to install that knock point. And so you can either use a heavy duty string. This happens to be T90. It's probably heavier than what I need, but it's what I have available. Or a brass knock point and some pliers to install that. For ease of installation, brass is probably the way to go. This requires you to know how to tie it on there. but I'm not sure how easy it is to move once you set that knock point. And there is some experimentation required for doing that. We'll get into that later in the video. Now, I didn't like this bag earlier in the video. I still really don't like the outside, although it's okay. The inside's felt lined, as I stated, which is really nice. And I finally figured out how to get the components of the bow in there. So the main pocket is where the riser is held. And then there's two pockets, one for each limb, and then a little loop of elastic. And the way to get these into those pockets is to stick them in sideways, like this. And then they'll fit. And then there's a pocket down here where I have the bowstringer, the string, the Allen wrench, and currently it's also holding my arrow rest because I haven't installed that yet. And theoretically you could also throw your arrows in here and put it over your back and carry it all in one convenient little package. I still wish it was a heavier duty material like some 1000 denier nylon for the exterior of the bag, and luckily since I know how to sew I could create that myself. One thing with the limbs is obviously, like I said before, you can order different weights, and I have the 35 pound and my 50 pound has also shown up. And basically where it looks different is the amount of maple wood core there is. Since it is mass produced, they probably just cut a certain thickness maple for the limb and then fiberglass each one the same. So there will be some variation in draw weights. We'll see how close this is to what it's labeled as, and also take note of any stacking. To do that, I'll have to track down a scale that will hook on the string. One thing I noticed is they've added felt, which is great. These letters, and the A is the top limb and the B is the bottom limb, so you know which one goes where. Usually the easiest way to do that is whatever side lists the weight and the length. A lot of times this is draw length. In this case it's bow length. That is the bottom limb, and so that's the way I always remember it. That information is always put on the bottom limb of the bow. So if you pick up a stick bow and has this on one side of the handle, and you can't really tell because it doesn't have a notched riser which side is down, usually it's the side that has the weight listed on it. Then as far as the riser goes, the notched side, the limb pocket next to the notched side, that's the top. The handle, that's the bottom. So you put the one with the draw weight on it on the bottom, and the one without the draw weight on it on the top is the easy way to remember that. And to do that, you're just going to unscrew this Allen head screw. And there's actually two washers here. You have this one, which fits the countersink of the Allen head, the thick one, and then you have the thin one. One thing you can do, this thin one kind of feels plastic almost. One thing you could kind of do is put a rubber grommet under that. That should also help with the sound. But on this, you want the curve of the limb to face outward, away from the back of the riser. So the back is the part facing you, the front is facing forward. In case you don't know, this is the front, this is the back, where you have the inlet here for your grip. And then the pockets are on the forward side, and then the curve faces forward. And you just put that screw through and you tighten it down. And you don't want to go super tight with this and compress everything, but you want it tight enough to where it's not going to loosen. So I go snug, and then about a quarter turn should do it. If you tighten it too much, this is aluminum riser and the threads are cut into the aluminum, and these steel screws will pull so hard that you'll just strip those threads right out of the aluminum and ruin the riser. attaching the top limb is done in the same fashion. So curve forward, tighten it down snug, and then give it about a quarter, or not a quarter turn, but an eighth turn. Next, you're going to want to string the bow, and for that they include a bow stringer. Supposedly these are better than the step-through method. In the step-through method, people say you can twist the limb. If you are going to use the step-through method, I'll probably do a separate video on it, but I've heard that using your open hand instead of grabbing the limb is the best way to do that. But up close, what you want to do is one end of your stringer will have this pocket that goes over the bottom limb. Before you put that on there though, this covers the cutouts for the string. So you want to put that string on there first. On most strings, you're going to have one loop that is larger than the other. So this loop right here is larger than this loop. So the small loop goes on the bottom and the large loop goes on the top. And the ideal is when you de-string your bow, the large loop is just pushed down over the limb, and that allows the tension to be removed from the bow and it to sit in its natural position. With this being a takedown, if you're taking it apart, you're going to remove the string anyway, so it doesn't matter. But for now, stick the small loop over this pocket, make sure it's kind of centered up in this groove, and then insert this end of the bow into this pocket on the stringer. And you're going to want this side facing the limb, like that. Now, this end just slides over the limb. So you put the limb through the hole of the string, and then this flat piece just rests on top of the limb. And what you'll do for stringing is you'll feed your string, your top half of your string up through that, and then you're going to stand on this line, pull up on the bow while slipping this over the tip of the limb. And I'll show you that here in a second. With the higher weights, it's very difficult. The string is kind of thin, and I recommend using shoes. I did it a couple times barefoot. The 35-pound limbs weren't so bad. Then my friend stuck the 50-pound limbs on there, and I didn't realize it, and I tried to string it. It was very difficult and very hard on the balls of my feet while barefoot. Everything's set up just as I have shown it. String's already fed through the loop on the bow stringer. And then you just kind of find the center of this. And I also like holding this further up on the limb to give me some mechanical advantage. Pull up on the bow, slip the string over the tip, kind of make sure it's centered in that groove, and then relax the pressure. One thing you want to do is check your brace height. I've listed the recommended brace height of this bow below. There's some confusion because brace height can go from the back of the riser or from the inside of the grip here, the recessed area of the grip. I would say that from the back of the riser is more common, since the website doesn't really say which is which. And to increase your brace height, you take the string off and you twist one end of it around a few times and then put the string back on. And that will cause the string to be a little bit shorter, which will flex the bow more, giving it more depth here and increasing. To decrease, you do the same thing. You take the string off, you untwist it a few times, and that will decrease it. and it looked like about 2 or 3 twists will increase or decrease by about 1/4 inch. And there is a sweet spot for bows. We'll cover that more in depth in another video. For right now, I just put it on there. The brace height is in about the middle of the range. So bow's strung. Next step would be to put on the arrow rest. Normally I would put on the arrow rest before assembling and stringing the bow, but I'm doing this following the instructions provided. Okay, so here's your arrow rest. Nothing in the picture says anything about this washer and this nut. I'll tell you, I have had some with just the nut, and basically what it does is locks the rest in place and keeps it from spinning, is the main focus. This threaded portion of the riser right here, just above the grip, is where your rest is going to be, and you want it in the notch side. You can also shoot this bow off the shelf. If you do that, I suggest picking up or purchasing a rest to install for that. And then how much you screw the rest in is part of bow tuning, and usually you want to adjust that to minimize the fishtailing of your arrow. And basically when the arrow hits the target, you want it to be sticking out straight and not kicked off to one side or the other. So it might be a little bit different for you depending on what arrows you're using, what draw weight you're using, stuff like that. My plan is to screw it all the way in, put an arrow in there, see if it's lined up perfectly with the string. So basically looking down the bow, the arrow's not kind of going this way or this way. And that's one nice thing about having a long arrow. If you stick it on the string and put it on there and it's not straight, say it's kicked out this way, try to hold this bow straight, say it's kicked out this way or kicked in, it'll be fairly obvious just looking at it. There are a lot of people saying this is a horrible rest. I would not shoot traditional fletched arrows across it. If you're doing that, off the shelf's probably better. And as far as plunger style rests, there are better ones out there. So you can pick up one of those if you want to drastically improve this setup almost immediately. But I will say I've bought a compound bow as a kit package, and this is the type of rest that it came with. And it is quite hard to turn by hand, so it might be worth carefully taking a pair of pliers and turning that, making sure you don't mess up or touch the pieces that are going to be holding the arrow. And the orientation that you want this in is the sides perpendicular to the ground, so straight up and down as you can get it, and the longer piece on the bottom and facing forward. That's what your arrow is going to rest on, and then this little tab here, the arrow is going to sit next to it. So when you knock your arrow, it's going to rest on this rest, and then just visually see if it's lined up. So me looking at this right now, I can tell the arrow is kicked off to the left side just a little bit. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the video. So the rest needs to be screwed in a little bit more. And then afterwards, shooting will confirm based on arrow flight whether or not I have that in the right position. Okay, so I pretty much had to screw this all the way in to get the arrow to line up with the string. Now I will say the arrow is offset, or the string is offset from this inner edge. So don't, when you're sighting down this, line the string up with that edge. Otherwise it'll look like your arrow is always kicked off to the left. What you want to do is look down this and basically tilt this until you cannot see any of the flat surface here. So basically it just becomes a line, and then from there you can look down your string and see if the point of the arrow is in line with the string, is what I'm doing. And that was screwed in all the way. Next step, on the back side of this, put your washer and then screw on your nut. And that nut tightened down will kind of act as a jam so that this rest isn't able to rotate and accidentally spin out. And again, I would go snug plus maybe about a quarter turn in this case. One note is I would say this rest and the threads are plastic. The nut appears to be steel, possibly, so it's easy to strip those threads. Once that's done, the last part of your setup is to determine your nock point. And they make bow squares for this, which I do not own. So one thing I would do is stick an arrow on there, hold the bow level, and then make the arrow level. And that should be, the bottom of that is 90 degrees off of perpendicular, or 0 inches off of perpendicular is how the bow level measures it. And then most people recommend you put your nock point somewhere from like a 1/4 inch above perpendicular to 3/8 of an inch above perpendicular. And the reason there's such a variance in what people recommend as nock point, because it'll be arrow dependent, kind of bow dependent, and shooter dependent, and whether you do like 3 fingers under, split, release, I mean, all that makes a difference. So my nock point that I set on here might not work for you. I'm going to set it probably about a 1/4 inch high, and I'll show you how to tie that in a minute. And once it's tied with the string one, you can walk it up the serving and down the serving by twisting it to tune your nock point. And basically the tuning part is when you shoot it, if it's doing this, your nock point's set wrong. And if it's fishtailing up and down, usually the thing is move your nock point higher. If it gets worse, move it lower until it dampens out, and you should get a fairly straight arrow flight. And you might have some movement side to side due to the spine weight being off or your rest kicking it to the side, but you should get no deflection up and down at all. It should just fly straight this way and maybe fishtail side to side. And one thing you can see is if it impacts the target and the arrow's sticking up like this, as long as you weren't shooting at an obscene downward angle, basically your arrow should be in line with where you released it from. So if the target's straight away from you, it should be straight. If it's angled slightly up, hopefully your target was on the ground. If it's kicked up a lot, your nock point's probably off. If it's kicked down, your nock point is off, and you need to tune that. So let's cover how to tie it, and then the bow is ready to shoot. We'll take it out and shoot it some, and just get an initial impression. I will say, holding the bow, I do agree with Kramer. The serving is up a little too high. Basically, you have your arrow here, and then about 3 inches of serving above that, which really serves no purpose. I mean, I could put 4 fingers above the arrow and still have serving left. So a little bit too much up there. Not enough down here. So I have about 3 inches of bare string that possibly will slap my guard and wear out quickly. And he pointed that out in his review. So one thing I will be looking at, as I mentioned, is getting a flash flight Flemish twist string from him. And it should be pretty easy. This 56-inch bow, and I believe your string that you'll be getting will be 53 inches, if I remember correctly. One thing nice about those Flemish twist strings is when you're twisting or untwisting your string to set brace height, it's really easy to tell which way the twist is going. On this string, when it's loose, it looks like there's no twist in it, and it's not until you get it on the bow and tight that you can spot the twist that's occurring in the individual strands. Now, as far as tying a nock point goes, you'll take some string that you're using for your nock point and lay it along the bowstring. And you'll kind of double that over as a loop. So basically what it looks like I'm doing off the string is I have a loop of it like this. And the amount of string you need is kind of up to how many wraps you do. But you want to take the long end of your loop here, free end, which is towards the bottom of the bow in my case, and start twisting that down here across the short end of your loop. And you're twisting it towards the top where the loop exists. So you're just wrapping that around. So here's the free end of my loop, and you can kind of see where I've started doing wraps, and I'm wrapping up towards that loop. And it looks like I might have done about 6 wraps. I'll do 10 just for good measure. Once you're done, you stick the free end through that loop. Go down to the other loose end and draw that in tight. So basically that loop will draw your free end back underneath your wraps, which will then lock everything into place. So basically both free ends are now under the wraps and unable to pull free. That creates just the slightest little bump there that is your knocking point, and the arrow goes below that knocking point. And from here you just clip off the free ends, being careful not to nick your bowstring or the serving. Scissors would be preferable in this case. All I have is a knife. So not ideal, because this increases risk of causing damage to the string. So there you have it. You could probably barely see it. There's my knock point. Now to set it, I just spin it around the serving and walk it up the serving or down the serving to get it in the correct spot. Here's my arrow at 90 and my knock point is way up here. So measuring from here to the bottom of that knock point, I currently have it's set 1/2 inch high, which is too high. So we'll just walk that down the string a bit. Okay, so there, it took me a while to twist that down. It is a very tightly tied thing. And set my arrow perpendicular, measuring off the bottom of the arrow. I'm just under 3/8 inch. So if anything, I expect when I'm shooting, if I get any porpoising, that my nock point will have to go higher, or lower, I mean. So try to hold this level. That's perpendicular. When I knock the arrow up against the nock point, it's kicked up just that amount. But when I draw, it should drop down level, if I'm remembering how this works correctly. And there you have it. Your bow is ready to go out and shoot. One thing I'll note on arrows, earlier I said don't use standard fletching or ones that have a wrap at the front with this wrist. It'll tear it up. If you're using those, you're probably better off shooting off the shelf. If you're going to use the rest, you're probably better off using vanes. Vanes are the plastic arrows, and they either come in a variation of 4 or 3. I happen to use 4 on my compound, so that's what I have laying around. I would probably go with some longer 3-inch vanes later on, specifically for this bow. With the 3 vanes or your traditional feathers, you're going to have 2 that are identical color. Those go to the shelf, and then you have one that is usually an opposite color. That's usually called the cock feather, and it faces outward. If you put that in the wrong way, it will hit this shelf and kick the arrow, back of the arrow to one side, and your shot will then swing wildly to the right if you're a right-handed archer. So always remember to do that. If you're not looking at your arrows, if your nocks are installed correctly, there'll be a little fin of plastic sticking outside of the nock. Usually that's in line with your cock feather, and that goes away from the shelf. So in this one, rotate it out, and it goes on the bow that way. So that little plastic fin I was showing you is facing out. And this way you can draw an arrow, have your hand on the nock, feel that vane, get it in the correct position without ever looking at the arrow or the feather. So just like that. I know it's in the correct position because I felt that fin. That only works if your nocks are installed correctly though. Or if your nocks have that little piece of material. So next step is go out and shoot it, see how it shoots. We'll probably also take some sound readings and some speed readings just to give you an idea of the noise level without any modifications. We'll probably also shoot my compound, see how noisy that is compared to this thing. I haven't shot traditional in a while, so I'll probably be starting out at a fairly close range, so I don't miss the target, because these arrows are very expensive. I think we were talking like $10 an arrow just for the bare shaft. There are 11.5 grains per inch, and then they have a 125 grain head on them, either a target point or a broadhead. And I want to say they're 32 inches, 31 inches from the nock, not the end of the nock, but where the string sits. 31 inches. So quite heavy. Hoping they work in this bow so I don't have to go out and find something new. But these were set up for a 75-pound compound. So since this is more of a center shot bow and I shouldn't have to worry about our archer's paradox, going that heavy of a spine shouldn't really matter, but we'll see. Okay, so now it's my favorite part of the review. I'm going to shoot the bow. Now I have shot it off screen already to check out my nock point, and that's one thing you want to check, is make sure when you release, the arrow's not flying like this through the air, or it'll... And if it is, try adjusting your nock point up. If it gets worse, adjust it down. Luckily, where I put it was somehow perfect for me. I haven't really noticed any porpoising. Now I have noticed a slight side to side movement. And that being out of a center shot bow, I'm thinking the spines of my arrows might be a little bit off, or it could be I don't have my rest set in the proper position. But it also could be the fact that I'm shooting vanes instead of feathers, and that's causing it to kick more to the side than it would. I will say when they impact the target, I'm not really noticing the arrows pointing one way or the other at different distances. They all seem to be coming straight out of the target. Now to do this, I'm going to set up this chronograph. It has to be 1 arrow's length away from the bow, according to the instructions. So it'll be just off screen here, and then my camera's set at 5 feet. And that's where I'm also going to have this sound meter recording sound levels. So we'll take 5 shots, give you the sound levels from those shots, and give you the speed readings off of them. Speed-wise, it's easy to make a comparison. Sound-wise, it's fairly hard because I really don't have anything to compare it to. I can compare it to my compound, but that really doesn't give you much of an idea of how it compares to other recurve bows, which would be a more fair comparison. This is supposedly quite loud for the slow speed it's shooting at, and the compound is going to be quite loud and it shoots at a much faster speed. But it'll be interesting to see how those two stack up. More importantly, this will give us a baseline for our modifications to the bow to make it quieter. And when we make those modifications, we can also look back at speed and see if that slowed down what the arrow is launching out of the bow at as a side effect of making it quieter. So let's get started and see what we end up with. So that was 73.4 decibels, surprisingly loud for a bow. So shot 1 there is 159. And really, this said 65.7 when I picked it up. I accidentally hit it on the frame of the camera tripod, which gave me a slightly higher reading. Shot 2 is 162. .8. Shot 3 is 161. That originally said 66.1 when I grabbed it off the tripod. Shot 4 is 157. So 70.9. Shot 5 was the exact same speed as 4 at 157. That's why it's displaying DU for duplicate and then 1 as 1 duplicate so far. Since I have 2 arrows left and I'm getting kind of a wide variation of levels there, I'm going to probably shoot those 2 arrows for a total of 7 shots instead of just 5. .2. That's about what my other shots are averaging around, with just a couple outliers. So one more and we'll see how that one stacks up. Shot 6 is 161. So 66.7 I'm probably going to eliminate 2 of those as outliers, and it might have been some background noise like that noisy bird you hear chirping, some kids screaming and throwing water balloons, or the impact on the target. And shot 7 at 160 feet per second. Okay, so that was shooting the Top Archery 56-inch recurve. I shot it out at 15 yards, which I haven't shot a bow really in 3 or 4 years, maybe more. I've been really busy. Haven't even gotten to go hunting, much less go out just practicing with this thing, or any bow for that matter. But I enjoyed shooting it. As you can see, after just a little bit of practice at 15 yards, I was getting decent sized groups. At least I wasn't missing the target. It'll be more interesting to back up even farther as I'm shooting this instinctively. I did not see any up and down fishtailing of the arrow, but I did see a little bit side to side. And part of me wonders if I have the rest here set in maybe just a little bit too far. And that's causing the arrow to kind of kick to the side when released instead of flying out straight. And looking down this now, it does look like I need to move this rest out a little bit and have it in too far. Yep, if I look down it with the arrow on there, the end of the shaft is just to the inside of the string, it appears. So that's one thing to be aware of when you're setting this up. It is kind of a center shot bow because of the riser design, and because of that, the arrow should be sitting straight off the string, and there should be minimal to no fishtailing shooting this thing. That's one of the benefits of the metal riser. With the felt on the limbs and no other modifications, there's only 71 decibels average. I did have a deviation of 8 decibels, which is quite large deviation, and I think I had some outlier shots, and I'm not sure if it was due to maybe me, like after the shot, gripping down on the grip after the arrow's left to keep the bow from kind of going out of my hand or tipping back, and I was dampening some of the sound, or the string was coming to rest up against my forearm and dampening the sound there. Because I had one shot somehow register 87 dB, and that is quite loud. That's like yelling at somebody loud. That's like turning on a hairdryer type loud. Only thing, and if I got rid of that one, the standard deviation would go way down, as well as the noise average. So I did it real quick, and it's leaving that high reading out. It drops it to 68.2, which is 0.2 under the compound bow, and it drops the standard deviation down to 3.2. So I don't know what happened there, but it definitely seems like that 87 is an outlier and shouldn't be really considered part of the data. And that's why I ended up shooting 7 shots instead of the 5 I had originally planned, because that reading just seemed bad to me, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that I should be worried about. Basically, I wanted to make sure that I could exclude that and it would be okay. Now this definitely sounds quieter shooting it, in my opinion. Here's both of them back to back. And to me the reason is the compound is quite quick and the noise is quite sharp, versus this is not so quick, and that I think the sound wave is spread out a little bit more, even though it might have the same amount of noise being produced. It's over a longer period. The impulse isn't as great. It's not as sharp, it's less defined, so basically you kind of have the build up to the noise and it doesn't seem as harsh, which makes it seem quieter, in my opinion. Okay, the sound levels for both bows were about 68.4 at 5 feet, so at 10 yards that ends up being 52.8 decibels. And then from there, 20 yards would be doubling 10 yards, so it'll drop to 46.8 decibels at 20 yards. From there, it won't drop another 6 decibels until you double 20 yards. So at 40 yards, it'll drop another 6 decibels for a total of 12 decibels and be 40.8 decibels. And then it won't drop another 6 decibels until you double 40 out to 80 yards, which is a little too far to be shooting. At 30 yards, it'll be 43.3 decibels. At 50 yards, it'll be 38.9 decibels. And at 60 yards, it will register as 37.3 decibels. Every 3 decibel drop is basically half the sound level, but that's not quite the way we perceive it. So starting at 10 yards in, that sound level is considered moderate, with it being about conversation level noise. 20 yards, that drops you down to more of a moderate noise level that is similar to rainfall. And once you drop below 40 decibels, you're in the faint range, getting down around the noise of a quiet refrigerator running. So just wanted to give you an idea of how loud the bow is at 5 yards, so we have something, or at 5 feet, so we have something to compare that I can recreate over and over. But then more importantly, here's what the bow sounds like at different ranges if you are shooting at game animals. Now, as far as speed, it's recurve, it's 35 pounds, it's going to be kind of on the slow side. It was shooting 159.6 feet per second on average. And I felt like I did really superb on the release, and the standard deviation kind of shows that I have just 2 feet per second standard deviation. And I had a low of 157 feet per second and a high of 162 feet per second. So really interesting that that was that consistent. The other interesting part is the higher speeds did not necessarily correspond to the louder sound readings. And I noticed the same thing on my compound bow. The higher speeds did not correspond to the noise level. And in fact, sometimes it was quite the opposite, which kind of goes against what I thought about bows and the corresponding speed versus sound. Because you stick silencers on a bowstring, that slows the string down. That usually results in slower arrow flight. Or at least that's what I thought. I'm going to definitely at some point put string silencers on this. It'll be interesting to see if the speed drops. The last thing I did was I took a bare arrow shaft like this, marked it for AMO draw length. And for you guys that don't know, AMO draw length is basically draw length from the string to the pivot point of the bow. So right here usually. And on this side I have a piece of tape with a line lining up with that, so I can line up with the line on the arrow shaft and know that I'm at a certain draw length. So that's usually like your actual draw length, the archer's draw length. AMO draw length is that draw length plus 1.75 inches. So really, this line here that's marked 22 inches is from the end of the nock, where the bowstring sits. So not up here at the end, but down here at the end of the notch, down to 20 inches and 1/4. And basically you add 1 inch and 3/4 to that, you get 22. So instead of 20, it's 20.25, it's 22 dead even. So actual length is 20.25. AMO draw length, though, is 22, is how that works. It's kind of confusing, but it's a way to standardize measuring the draw length so that everybody's the same. And that is the draw length that AMO draw length is the length that you should use when measuring a bow's weight. So usually a limb will say maybe 35 at 28, 28 being the standard usually. So you know that bow measures 35 pounds draw weight at 28, a AMO draw length of 28, which would be an actual draw length of 26 1.25 because you have the extra 1.75 inches added on there. Anyway, that's the draw length that you want to use for the weight. And I started back at 22 inches, 24 inches, 28 inches, or sorry, 26 inches, 28 inches, and 30 inches. I had a mark for 32, but I didn't feel comfortable drawing to that because I was getting some interesting results. Here is the graph of the draw weight. And as you can see, the first 3 data points almost form a straight line. And that's what you should normally see within the normal operating range of the bow. Basically, it's like a giant spring, so you have a quite linear increase of force as you increase distance of compression, or in this case, the draw length. And so at 22 inches, we were getting about 30 pounds, 5 pounds under the draw length. But that's also 6 inches short of 28 inches that draw length is normally measured at. At 24 inches, it had stepped up to 33.8. At this point, I can tell that I am not going to hit 35 at 28. At 26 inches, it's 37.9. So I am 2 inches short, and I'm 3 pounds over the specified draw length, which is kind of what I was expecting to be slightly over, because these bows aren't handmade or anything. They basically take a known thickness of wood and then layer it with a known thickness of fiberglass. And so what you get is, wood is a living thing. It comes out of a tree. It's living. Each thin strip of wood is going to draw differently. And so what happens is, these limbs might have a slightly higher or slightly lower draw weight than another set of 35-pound limbs, even though they're supposed to be the same. And part of what happens is they design it to be slightly over. That way you don't get in trouble for having an underweight bow. And they just, from there, all 35-pound limbs get built with the exact same thickness of wood and the exact same thickness of fiberglass. So it's not like they were built, checked, and then modified and reshaped and then checked until you get the exact draw weight. And here's a shot of the top limb from the 35-pound and the top limb from the 50-pound limbs I have. And as you can see, the wood is really the only thing that's varying in thickness. And other than that, the front profile and the amount of fiberglass is the same. But the data points up until this point create a straight line across the graph. After this, we move to 28 inches, and you see a sharp change in the graph. That is where stacking occurs. Stacking is basically, as you continue drawing the bow, it gets harder and harder to compress the material on the backside of the limb. And so instead of being linear and smooth, all of a sudden you have huge weight increases. This happens somewhere between 26 inches and 28 inches. It's probably not exactly as the graph shows. If I took more data points, it would occur somewhere in between those 2 points. But I wanted it to be shown this way. One is it's easier to measure just a few points and kind of extrapolate what you'll see in between those. And 2, it gives a nice sharp change in profile there so you can see stacking happening. So at 28 inches, it is 44.3 pounds. So my 35-pound limbs are almost 45-pound limbs. I'm wondering if my 50-pound limbs are the same. At a 30-inch draw, which is really a long draw for a recurve bow, it turns out, is all the way up at about 50 pounds. 50.3 was the average. And each of these weights I'm giving you are average of 3 pulls. That way I made sure any little change in position and lining up the lines would kind of get canceled out. Definitely start stacking after 26 inches somewhere, which I find interesting. Usually you don't really run into stacking until after the specified draw length of the bow, which is normally 28. I also find it interesting that the draw weight is almost 10 pounds off. So that's the only real negative thing I can say about this bow though, is that weight being that far off. I can't believe it's that far off. And it'll be really interesting to see if maybe it's just these limbs and my 50-pound limbs will be more accurate. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case because those 50-pound limbs are quite heavy, and I can tell a huge difference in drawing that, and even stringing it is a huge difference. So I wonder on that if I'm going to hit 50 pounds at 26 inches and then be at almost 60 or 70 pounds once I get to my 28-inch draw point. We'll see. And so I will be doing a separate review on those, and we'll get the velocity that they fire at, how much louder they are, and what the draw weight is. So negatives, this can be loud compared to other recurves. It's about as loud as a fairly tamed compound bow, so I wouldn't say it's extremely loud. And it seems like, so far, based on my experience, the limbs are going to be heavier than what you purchased. Now, on the top side of that is, if somebody checks the pull weight of your bow, you're going to be good. You won't come in underweight. On the downside of it is, you're buying a 35-pound bow and you end up with 40 or 45. It's a heck of a difference, and some people won't be able to draw this. So those are two negatives. Draw weight being off, which any cheap bow that you buy is probably going to be off, and they're probably all going to be on the heavy side because they want to avoid any problems with you being measured, and they don't want your bow coming up short. So they want to make sure it's at least 35 pounds is basically how you should read that. Noise could be a factor depending on what you're comparing it to. Draw length is not too bad. I mean, I got it out to 30, and I felt comfortable to where I could have drawn it to 32, but I had already seen stacking in my data, so it didn't bother. Pros is, I feel like it's kind of light. At least compared to the Bear recurve that I've shot, which was a wood riser, this feels lighter. Some people have said it's felt heavier. I wonder if that's just because of the aluminum subconsciously is making them think that it's heavier. I will say that Bear bow was quite a bit longer. It was like a 62-inch recurve, where this is a 56-inch recurve. And I put that length, or short length, in kind of a pro or good thing, because you do not want a long bow out hunting, and this is quite short as recurves go. One thing that could be a problem because of that short length is, as you draw back to further and further lengths, you're going to get what is string pinch, where the angle of the string gets sharper and sharper. And if you go back and look at the section where I showed me shooting the compound bow, you can definitely see that is a very short parallel limb bow, and the angle on the string is really sharp. It's something like that, versus the angle on this is more open angle like that. So as you draw further back though, that angle is going to close down and eventually start really pinching on your fingers. I have not noticed that with this, but at the same time, I've only drawn it about 28 inches, and if I really work and use bad form, I can get it back to 30 inches. But in my mind, being only 56 inches long is a huge pro. On the downside to the shortness, usually short bows are a little bit more unforgiving. See, other things I like about this bow is, if you wanted to, it's drilled and tapped, so you can put in a bow sight if you're not into traditional recurve and instinctive shooting. It's
threaded here for a arrow rest. It comes with one. You do not have to use it. A lot of people, their complaint is with the rest. I really didn't find it to be horrible. It also has a small grip, which for my hand size isn't a big deal, but it was one thing I looked at. Other wood risers especially looked very clunky and too large, and I wanted to stay away from that. But at the same time, I also shoot a lot of compound bow, and it is a really small grip, almost identical to this one. So not only do I like the feel of it, I also like the look of it. To me, it looks sleeker, better. Last thing is, it's tapped right here, so you can stick a stabilizer on it. For people that don't know what a stabilizer is, it is this piece sticking out right here. They can be metal. This one's metal with rubber covering it, and it's flexible. And this supposedly helps this bow shoot quieter. And then also, it prevents weird torquing movements, because you have a mass out here that's trying to be moved, and so it resists any twisting movement. I view having those attachment points as a bonus and a good thing. For the review, I was just shooting instinctively with none of that except for the rest, because that's what the package came with mainly. But so you can really shoot it either way. You can put on fancy drop away rest and sights, and probably even put a peep sight back here and put on stabilizers and shoot it however you want to. You can probably even hook it up for mechanical release versus finger release. I liked that it came with the stringer. That helps you to keep from twisting a limb while you're stringing your bow. Remember to de-string your bow if you're not going to shoot. Basically, I'll leave it strung overnight if I'm planning on shooting the next day. Most I'll probably leave it as 3 days. The sack that it comes with to store the bow in, I don't like the outside material, but the inside is a nice felt lining, and it has little attachment points to keep everything separate and from scraping, so I love that. The bowstring is adequate. You'll have to attach your own nock point. I say adequate because the serving is definitely too high. It should be shifted down here, which would make putting in a peep sight really difficult, if not impossible. My plan is to switch this out with a Flemish twist fast flight string. And the one nice thing and a definite pro is these tips are definitely reinforced, so it'll be able to handle that string. I've already got some weird fraying going on down here. I must have rubbed on something. Other than that, it doesn't seem to be fraying too much here, but a lot of that might also come down to technique too, where I'm not really hitting my arm. I wear an arm brace or an arm guard, but really I try to shoot to not hit that. Other than that, the glass seems to be real nice. I really don't see anything wrong manufacturing wise or craftsmanship wise, and really it's a great bow if you're just getting into archery. Even an intermediate, I think, would enjoy this. Definite pro is the price and being able to detach the limbs so you can easily transport it and buy replacement limbs. Definite bonus that you can pick up extra limbs so you can get it in one weight for you and then switch it over when you plan on letting your wife shoot it, or as you move from state to state if you plan on hunting in several locations. For example, I can hunt where I'm at with these limbs, and then I can switch to 50-pound limbs and go hunt moose in Alaska. The other thing is I plan on using this for bow fishing, and because it's cheap and somewhat robust, I don't have to worry about ruining an expensive bow. Especially last time I went bow fishing, I hurt myself pretty bad on my shooting hand, left hand, and immediately dropped the bow I was using in the water where it sank. And that's another reason I loved having these inserts, is because I can stick a bow fishing reel here. I can stick a roller rest for a bow fishing arrow here. and I'm ready to go. So I like it. Whether or not you buy it, you just have to basically watch the review, think about how the stuff I've talked about applies to you, and make that decision. For that reason, I can't recommend this over another bow. For one thing, I've only had experience shooting this, my compound, and that Bear Archery. To me, in my mind, I did not see the Bear Archery being any better than this. And I can't, other than it looking absolutely beautiful, being solid wood, I can't justify the price being what it was compared to this. Although I will guarantee that that Bear Archery, whatever weight it was, it probably pulled that weight because they took the time to tiller out the limbs and make sure it pulled what it was advertised at pulling. But I will say it was a single piece bow versus takedown limbs. So really, if the weight upset me enough, I could buy another set of 35-pound limbs and try to return these. If you do get it, I don't think you'll be disappointed, basically. The only other thing after choosing the bow is figuring out what arrows to use with it. I haven't picked out some arrows specifically for this bow yet. The ones I have work really well, but I do not recommend you get them. They are quite expensive. Hopefully that provided you with some good information and you can decide whether or not you want to go pick up this bow from Amazon. I will include a link below. If you like the video about this bow, next up I will be reviewing the 50-pound limbs I bought for it. So I'll be doing some more shooting through the chronograph, looking at how loud it is and what the true weight on the limbs are at different pull lengths, like I did in this video. And then after that, I will be showing how to set it up for bow fishing, and we'll probably get some videos where I'm going out and bow fishing. I've only done it bow fishing once or twice in the past, and I did not get anything. Hopefully this time goes a lot better. And I look forward to making those videos, and hopefully you'll get a chance to watch those and enjoy them. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and everything I provided. And please, if you did, give it a thumbs up button. Maybe share it with some people that are interested in archery or interested in getting into archery more specifically and haven't decided on a bow yet. And think about subscribing, and thanks for watching.